Let's view the default tenants and namespaces, as well as create a new tenant and namespace. We will need to provide our service account produce and consume permissions on the namespace to allow our client to produce and consume messages from all topics in this namespace. Here in StreamNative UI, let me go ahead and select our instance, which will automatically select the cluster in that instance. The left pane will populate with various menus that are available at the cluster level, including tenants. If I click on tenants, I'll be able to see a list of tenants that are available by default for all clusters. And as well at the top, I would be able to select a tenant so I could see more information about it. So in this case, I'll go ahead and click on the public tenant. Multi-tenancy is a core feature of Pulsar, providing a security boundary for multiple parts of your organization to use a single Pulsar cluster. Tenant configuration can be delegated to tenant admins who may better understand the need of that part of the organization. Here we're going to create a new tenant called My Tenant. So if I click back here at the top, I'll go to New and I can say My Tenant. Here is where you could select a user or service account to provide admin privileges to this tenant, but the service account that we just created, I actually want to have a lower level of privilege, so I'm going to leave this blank for this tenant. And I'll click New Tenant to create my new tenant. Going back to the menu at the top, let me select My Tenant, and if I go to Configuration, this is where I can always add admin roles in the future. Next, let me create a new namespace in this tenant. By default, it will have no existing namespaces. Namespaces are a grouping mechanism for topics requiring similar policies. For example, if you have multiple related topics that all require the same message retention policy, it makes sense to apply the policy at the namespace level, and then create all topics inside of that namespace. Many policies applied at the namespace level can be overwritten on individual topics. And this also applies to permissions like produce and consume for all topics in the namespace. So if we apply permissions here at the namespace level, they will apply to all topics within that namespace. Let's now create a new namespace called My Namespace. I can either click on that namespace here, or going to the top menu here, I can select my namespace. If I go into Configuration and click on Add for Authorize, I can select my service account that I've already created and add produce and consume permissions. There are additional permissions that you may need if you were doing other things besides just producing and consuming using clients. There's functions, packages, sinks, and sources that are available specifically when you're doing things like deploying connectors, functions, or PF/SQL. Be sure to click Save at the bottom of the page to apply those settings. And then as mentioned before, there are also settings for backlog as well as cleanup, which is things like message TTL and retention period. When applied here at the namespace level, will apply to all topics inside of this namespace. If you then like to view any topics that are in an existing namespace, you can always go to Topics here and you'll be able to see that list of topics.